Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matty here, and today, Secluded Springs has just released. I'm recording this at almost 3 a.m. after our release live stream. Shout out to everybody that tuned in, and we are immediately getting right into it. One thing I will say is that Secluded Springs is full of a bunch of really crazy new cards. Let's talk about them. This is going to be our full set review. We're going to speed things up a little bit just because there's a lot of cards in the set that are just not worth talking about, as is basically every Pokemon Pocket set, but there's a lot of really cool cards. So we're just going to skip over some stuff and we're going to go right into the important stuff. Timestamps will be down in the description below. Feel free to jump around in this video however you see fit, and don't forget to like and subscribe and stay tuned for all of the future videos that we have coming up in the upcoming days and weeks for this new for a Secluded Springs season. Really excited about it. First off, let's talk about Jumpluff EX, one of the 5 new EX Pokemon that came out in this mini set. Jumpluff EX is a stage 2 grass type EX Pokemon with a retreat cost of 1. It is weak to lightning, but it has a colorless energy, single energy attack cost, breeze by attack, 70 damage, and you may switch this Pokemon with one of your benched Pokemon. You may. Now, I believe that you, I don't know if you have to or not. Like, this is, like, kind of a weird wording for me. I always get confused about this stuff. I don't know if it means once we attack, we have to switch, or if we have the choice to switch. I don't know. I mean, if it says you may, that makes me feel like it's an option, but we'll have to just sort of play with it to see if it is an option. But either way, Jumpluff EX is really interesting. It's a grass Pokemon, which means we can play things like Erica's to heal this thing up, and we can also play Lily because it's a stage 2 Pokemon, but we can also play Leaf Cape to bring this guy up to 190. 160 definitely is not a lot of HP for a stage 2 EX Pokemon, but we do have Leaf Cape to bring this thing up to 190, 70 damage. And again, this is one colorless energy. We can play this in literally any deck and with any other combination of cards that we possibly want to. One thing that I find very interesting about Jumpluff with this attack is all of the potential. There's a lot of really strong Pokemon that we can then choose to bring up into the active spot. The number one most obvious thing is probably going to be Oricorio. We can attack with Jumpluff and then just retreat into Oricorio, and our opponent can't hit Oricorio, right, if they're not playing the correct Pokemon. So very interesting indeed. This is technically only going to increase the total damage output that we do by 20, but of course, after our opponent does inevitably go through 2 Oricorios, they have to then go through Jumpluff, right? So that's its own thing. We could also, I guess, play Jumpluff with, like, colorless Pokemon and Ilima, like an Arceus or a Snorlax, to basically infinitely, pick up our Pokemon and not deal any damage. You could play this thing with, like, Druddigon or the new Zangoose, which we'll take a look at, or things like Mewtwo. A lot of possibilities with Jumpluff that I think is really interesting, and I'm really excited about this Pokemon. I think that it's very similar to Crobat, but kind of better in some ways. We're not poisoning, but we are doing a really strong effect. Colorless energy. Again, Jumpluff, we can play this however we want in any deck, and I think that's definitely really cool. So shout out to Jumpluff. Was not expecting to get that card as one of the EXs in this set, but there you go. Next up is Celebi. We have a new non-EX Celebi with a really interesting attack. 70 HP, retreat cost of 1 weak to fire. Temporal Leaves, 40 damage for 2 grass energies. If your opponent's active Pokemon is an evolved Pokemon, devolve it by putting the highest stage evolution card onto it, or on it, into your opponent's hand. So effectively what this means is that we're attacking, hitting for 40, and then forcing them to, I guess, devolve their Pokemon into whatever, the next stage that they evolved from was, and then putting that card back into their hand. Now, this is actually a lot stronger than you might think, because this damage happens before the effect happens. So, for instance, we could play Red to deal a total of 60 damage. We could hit our opponent's Charizard EX, for an example, dealing 60 damage and then devolving them into Charmander, but if the Pokemon that we devolve them into has no more HP remaining, then that is a KO. So since Celebi is not just devolving the Pokemon, it's also dealing damage. This is going to allow us to take some really interesting KOs where, some grass type decks or Celebi in general obviously would not be able to do otherwise. Really interesting. This paired with like a Giovanni or a Red, but the thing is it'll work for a Red. Like if you're attacking an EX Pokemon, the damage happens first before you devolve. So technically speaking, we could play Red and deal 60 damage to an EX Pokemon and then devolve them. Now, the other thing here is that if our opponent used Rare Candy to evolve into that Stage 2 Pokemon, then they would not, of course, devolve into the Stage 1 Pokemon because they never evolved into it anyway. So it would immediately skip down to the, the basic Pokemon version, right? Let's go like a Charizard EX. If you Rare Candy into it, and then you get hit with Celebi, it'll go down to Charmander. This is a big deal because this effectively negates like Rare Candy. So if you do this enough times, then your opponent just won't be able to ever go back into their EX Pokemon unless they're playing that middle evolution. A really, really interesting card. We can play these things with like Leafeon or I guess other options as well. Celebi's a really interesting card because it immediately gets around some of the difficulties that other grass type decks have right now. I really like Celebi, and I think that this card, although it's 2 grass energy, so we can't play this in like a bunch of different ways. It's really only we'll see play in grass type decks. I do think that this is also a really, really interesting card. So shout out to Celebi. We also have a new Durant, which for also 2 grass energies does 40, but we discard the top card of our opponent's deck, so we do get a little bit of a mill card here. Mill meaning, of course, just sort of discarding cards from your opponent's hand or deck. This is a really big deal. We don't have a lot of like card discard in Pokemon Pocket. I'm not saying this card is going to be like super strong, but in general, like mill is strong because our opponent only has 20 cards in their deck, and whenever they start the game, that means they only have 15 cards in their deck. So very high likelihood that Durant could just mill off a really important card, and I find that to be very, very funny. So shout out to Durant. We have, of course, Entei EX, which we have already talked about. Shout out to Entei. This new Talent Flame for 1 energy, stage 2 does 50 and burn, so that's fairly significant. We do have a new Poliwag with Call for Family, and this is actually a very relevant card because it is evolving into one of our new EX Pokemon coming later in this video. Shout out to Poliwag, Call for Family. Just like what other Call for? I forget exactly, but it's not a random card. It pulls like 1 Poliwag. I think that Execute has something like this as well. Basically allows you to thin out another Poliwag from your deck. Going to be really good for that Poliwrath, Politoad combo, which we'll talk about later in this video. Tentacruel, 50 damage and stun, poison, paralysis. I don't know what's going on there. Slowking we've already talked about, so shout out to Slowking with Litter. Definitely kind of a meme deck here, but it is a real archetype, something that I'm actually interested to test out. Of course, Suicune EX, we've already talked about Suicune, but here it is. All of the legendary beast Pokemon have been covered in previous videos, so if I'm not really covering them much in this video, that's why. Go check out the some of our more previous videos where we've already covered these legendary beast Pokemon. They're all really cool, really strong, and we will likely be building decks with them later as the days and the weeks go on. So yeah, if you're curious about these cards, I have my full opinions on a previous video, so go check that out. Here's the new Milotic, again, another card that was released in the trailer or announced in the trailer. We've already talked about it. Healing Ripples, healing for 60 damage is kind of crazy, but it's going to be pretty situational. Obviously not that strong early game. We'll see how Milotic functions, but again, we've already kind of talked about it. And here is Mantyke, again, another card we've already talked about. Water type, definitely getting a pretty significant buff in the set, which I think is very, very cool. Shout out to Mantyke. And of course, Raikou. We've already talked about Raikou. These are cards that, was shown in the trailer. So we've, talked about them in a previous video. And I don't want to waste too much time of today's video talking about those cards because there's a lot of other really interesting stuff to take a look at. None of these other electric type Pokemon are that relevant. This Electros does 120 for 3. Again, nothing too crazy here. Shout out to Boltund. It does 70. But if you have, if it has any damage onto it, it can be used. You can use this attack for 1 energy. Again, like, these are kind of throwaway cards for sure. However, we do have this new Misdreavus, which is a very interesting card here. Now, one thing I will say, spoiler, we'll get into it later as this video goes on, but control, like true control decks, are coming to Pokemon Pocket. We'll talk about it later, but Misdreavus is kind of one piece of that puzzle here. Infiltrating Inspection is the ability name. Once during your turn, when you put this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, you may have your opponent reveal their hand. This is really strong, paired with things like Red Card, like with Mars, even with Silver, being able to see your hand, your opponent's hand before you play Silver. This is really useful. I don't know if it's going to really see that much play other than in some specific control type decks, but I do think that this is a very good ability with all of the hand disruption options that are in the format right now. I actually really do like Misdreavus. And it does evolve into Mismagius, so we can play the evolved version if we want to do some damage. This attack is actually crazy. So this is a stage 1 Pokemon for 1 energy, and its attack cost 1 psychic energy, which means going first on our second turn, we can attack with Mismagius. It does 0 damage. However, Cursed Pros, Pros, I don't know. At the end of your opponent's next turn, do 90 damage to the defending Pokemon. So for technically 1 energy, we do a delayed 90 damage on a stage 1 Pokemon. That is a big deal. That is a lot of damage. I don't think that this attack can be boosted by Red or Giovanni or anything because it's not damage. It's an effect of an attack, which Red and Giovanni would not, I guess buff or increase. But that's a lot of damage to be kind of putting on your opponent's Pokemon. Now, one thing I am curious about is if your opponent retreats, if this effect gets wiped. I would assume it would. Basically, any negative effects on your opponent's Pokemon will get wiped if they retreat to the bench, so they can get around this attack pretty easily. That's how I'm kind of reading this attack. I don't believe that if they retreat to the bench, they'll still take 90 damage, but I could be wrong about that. Anyway, that's Mismagius. Next up here, feeding into that control archetype. Again, all of the control cards, the new sort of control strategy that Pokemon Pocket seems to be implementing in this mini set is all psychic type. So these psychic type cards, very kind of control-y here. Galarian Cursola, I think, is definitely going to be paired very well in this control archetype. Perish Body is the ability here. 80 HP, Spooky Shot for 260 damage. But the ability here, Perish Body, if this Pokemon is in the active spot and is knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, flip a coin. If heads, the attacking Pokemon is knocked out. That's right. So a 50-50 chance to basically just kamikaze, destroy, and one-hit KO your opponent. This is a really big deal because most of the time you're going to get KO'd will be against a 2-prize Pokemon. It'll be against like an EX Pokemon, right? Other than things like Silvally or whatnot. But of course, EX Pokemon, very, very common. So this effectively means you're trading 1 point for almost a 50-50 chance at 2 points. Now, you might be wondering, this card is going to be crazy with Will. This attack or this ability will not work with Will because this ability doesn't proc like during your turn. I'm almost certain about that. I don't believe, like this won't work with Will because you would be getting KO'd on your opponent's turn. So yeah, Will not be working with the Galarian Cursola, hopefully or luckily, because that would be absolutely insane. But this is going to be really, really strong for a variety of reasons, and we'll talk about it later. I actually really love this card, and I think it's going to be very, very annoying. And your opponent here is just going to have to deal with it, which I think is really, really scary for sure. There is a supporter card. We just saw Misdreavus, which is another cool control card, control type card. Control, and by control, I basically mean like how do I define control decks? Basically, it's decks that don't really play the game. They almost stop your opponent from being able to play the game, and that's their win condition. We'll get into it more later in this video, but we could play Galarian Cursola and Giratina and just not ever attach any energies to this thing, and then just kind of ramp up Giratina while Galarian Cursola sits in the active spot, force your opponent to KO double Galarian Cursola, and then go into Giratina and then just finish the games. I think that this actually has the potential to be one of the strongest, I guess, strategies in the game. Like, theoretically speaking, I know it's a coin flip, but it's like kind of worth it. Like, this is probably one of the best sort of active sitting Pokemon in the game right now. 50-50 chance to KO is nuts. I mean, that's generally like a really, really strong ability there. So shout out to Galarian Cursola. We have Latias and Latios. Again, these are Pokemon that were shown in the trailer. We've already talked about them. I don't feel that strongly about these cards. I don't think they're like that crazy, but they are psychic Pokemon and they do work for this new psychic control archetype. Again, at the end here, we'll get into the bread and butter of what that really means. Let's skip ahead to Dugtrio. Okay, so Dugtrio for 1 fighting energy here. Cliff Crumbler, 40 damage. Discard the top card of your deck, and if that card is a fighting Pokemon, this attack does 60 more damage. So yeah, okay, so for 1 energy, we have the ability to deal 100 damage on our second turn going first. That is a lot. That is effectively KOing almost like a lot of basic Pokemon in the game. I think this is kind of meme. The only way to play Dugtrio would be to play a bunch of fighting Pokemon, and I don't necessarily know if that's going to happen. But the fun part about Dugtrio is that we do have Hiker, right? So we have Hiker. We can actually control what the top card of our deck is. Dugtrio is actually a lot better, and it's probably the #1, or I guess really the only Pokemon that I can think of that directly works with Hiker in a way that kind of synergizes. So if you don't know what Hiker was, it's a supporter card that came out in A4 and allows you to effectively look at the top few cards of your deck and then put them back in any order. And this is going to allow us to do 100 damage very consistently with Dugtrio, and I think that's a really, really fun combination. So shout out to Dugtrio. Very, very cool. We have a lot of these really interesting single prize archetypes or non-EX archetypes like Slowking with tool cards, this sort of control psychic type stuff. You know, Dugtrio here. There was another one if we go back. What was it? Like Celebi is a really cool card. Really, really interesting stuff. However, the last EX Pokemon in the set is fighting type, but it's Poliwrath. It is a fighting type Poliwrath. I did not think we would be getting fighting type Poliwrath in this set. This thing threw me for an absolute loop. Anyway, stage 2 fighting type, 180 HP. It has the attack Hydro Knuckle. 1 fighting, 2 colorless energy. Okay, this is a really big deal. 100 damage. But if this Pokemon has any water energy attached, this attack does 40 more damage. That's right, 40 more damage. So 140 for 3 energies, but not only that, we have the Politoed, which came out, I believe, in A4, but maybe the set prior, which buffs the damage of any Pokemon that evolves from Poliwag by 40, allowing Poliwrath, yes, to deal 180 damage for 3 energies. Really, really cool. I think because this is 1 fighting and 2 colorless, this actually really opens up the ability for us to play Poliwrath in a variety of different deck lists, and I'm really excited about that. Of course, you could play it with Mantyke. You could, of course, play it with Politoed to increase that damage, but you could also just play this with Sylveon. You could play a fighting psychic type Sylveon deck, which could be pretty cool. A lot of opportunities here for Poliwrath, which I really enjoy, and I'm actually really excited about. So pretty cool. Definitely a very, very cool EX Pokemon. We'll have to see how it functions. We do have the new Phanpy, which was announced, or I guess shown in the trailer, and they showed this card, and I don't understand why they, at the time, I did not understand why they showed us Phanpy. I didn't get it. I thought this card just didn't make any sense, and it wasn't very good. But then I saw another new card that came out in the set, and it all makes sense. We'll get there in a little bit, but keep in mind, Phanpy here, Flail, 1 fighting energy. It does damage equal to the amount of damage that is on this Pokemon. However, Phanpy, right, only 70 HP, so, you know, it's not going to be that useful, right? It doesn't seem like it's that strong. Well, you're wrong, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, okay? We got to get to it. There is a new Dawn fan, but it's not good. Anyway, we have Relicanth with Takedown, does temp damage to itself. These are bad cards. We do have a Crustle that can do 100 damage, flip a coin of heads. It does 150, but it's 4 fighting energy, so good luck, Crustle. This new Seviper does extra damage only against Zangoose. So, you know, if you go up against a Zangoose, there you go. We have the new Zoroark, which was leaked, but it wasn't, I guess, shown in the trailer. Elusive Trickery. If your opponent's Pokemon is knocked out by damage from this Pokemon's attacks, during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage done and effects of attacks done to this Pokemon. This is a pretty big deal. 2 Dark Energy, 70 damage. This is a really tricky revenge attacker that is effectively immune next turn. So you can come in, KO your opponent's Pokemon, and then guarantee that you're going to get another 70 damage off unless they Sabrina you, which is pretty cool. That's actually a really decent effect here. I don't know if this is really going to see play in a lot of meta decks, but like on paper, this is a strong ability and definitely a really, really cool Pokemon. One of my favorites I really like. Malamar here, 1 energy, mental surge, 20 damage to all of your opponent's Pokemon. Every single one of your opponent's Pokemon gets 20 damage done to it, and I think that's actually kind of cool. This reminds me of Lurantis, actually. And I think it's almost the exact same thing. A little bit different, obviously, but it's like the dark type Lurantis. Kind of funny. Yeah, there we go. This is a card that's going to work with Umbreon. So people are going to try to play Malamar Umbreon. I don't know if I believe in it, but theoretically speaking, you could tag all of your opponent's Pokemon, and then Umbreon can choose which one it wants to bring up and then attack. Yes, that does kind of make sense. I don't think that that's going to be that strong of an archetype, but it does remind me of like Lurantis Decidueye from back in the day. We do have a new Altaria. So this is the Dragon type card from the set. This is not a Generation 2 Pokemon. This is a Generation 3 Pokemon. But the cool thing about Altaria is that it has 2 colorless energy in its attack cost. However, Dragon Arcana, this is 120 Stage 1 Pokemon. A lot of similarities here to something like a Silvally. However, we do not have Gladion. Dragon Arcana, 40 damage, and if this Pokemon has 2 or more different types of energy attached, this attack does 60 more damage. So yes, this is technically a card that we can splash into like multi-energy decks and then, you know, potentially deal 100 damage for 2 energies. I kind of like it. It's actually a little bit more consistent than you might think if we're playing like a baby Pokemon and then just sort of like a different energy type than that baby Pokemon. We can pretty consistently get that 100 damage off with Altaria. However, I think that we would rather just play Silvally anyway, just because it's like more consistent and it's also a colorless Pokemon. But Altaria, definitely pretty cool. Very similar to Silvally, but I still think Silvally is just a better card in general. But anyway, Altaria does, I think, have more HP, so there's that. We have Farfetch'd, Lickitung, Licky, all bad cards. However, we have 2 new baby Pokemon on top of Mantyke, and they are absolutely crazy, guys. These are some of the craziest cards I've ever seen. Will they be good? We'll have to wait and see, but they are very, very funny. Let's take a look here. The first one, Igglybuff, 30 HP, colorless Pokemon. Not that that matters, but it's colorless. Sleepy Lullaby, 10 damage. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now asleep. That is right, guys. We are now going to have to deal with just turn 1 being asleep. Yes, when you evolve, of course, you know, the sleep goes away. It's a 50-50 coin flip anyway, but being asleep from the get-go is going to be very, very annoying. This is going to be a very funny archetype. This is going to be a really, really interesting card. We'll have to see if it really ends up doing that much. Of course, Pokemon Center Lady can heal, and then things like Lyra can get you out of the active even if you're asleep. Evolving, you know, of course, gets rid of your status condition. Arceus is immune to it, but either way, an absolutely insane card. I don't know what they're doing here by giving us this Igglybuff, but 10 damage and sleep for 0 energy cost is hilarious. There's going to be games where you can kind of set up behind an Igglybuff and your opponent's just going to be stuck being asleep for forever, and I think that's really, really funny. We'll have to see if it's meta. Again, I don't know. Like, we'll have to just kind of put this card into practice and see if it works. But theoretically, in terms of like stalling your opponent, this is one of the better cards in the game, in a really, really interesting card. Really funny. One of the weirdest Pokemon that I've ever seen, but here you go. 10 damage and sleep for 0 energy on a basic Pokemon. I don't know what we're doing. I really don't. I don't know anymore. Here's Miltank. We already saw Miltank, and we talked about it in a previous video, but Miltank does have a card that directly supports it. So let's talk about Miltank here. 110 HP, colorless Pokemon, 1 energy in its attack cost, Rolling Frenzy. It does 10 damage until this Pokemon leaves the active spot. This Pokemon's Rolling Frenzy attack does 30 damage, plus 30 damage, and this effect stacks. So the way this card works is that you bring in Miltank, or you lead off with it, you attach, and then you hit. And you're only hitting for 10, but next turn, you're hitting for 40. And then the turn after that, if you're still alive, you're hitting for 70. So on and so forth. Miltank here with Giant Cape goes to 130 HP. We also do have things like Ilima, of course, just to maybe survive yourself from a prize, your opponent taking a prize. But this is a really, really strong card. It's colorless, so we can play this in a variety of different games. And I think that Miltank is actually going to be surprisingly strong. There's really one reason for that, and we'll talk about that right now. This is a very anti-aggro card. And we'll get into it because there's a card that directly pairs with Miltank, but this is actually a card, and we've talked about it already, that I think actually has a decent amount of potential. We'll get into it for sure, and we'll build some decks with it. But anyway, there is Miltank. Not only do we have Igglybuff and Miltank, but we also have Azurill. This is another baby Pokemon, the last baby Pokemon coming in Secluded Springs. It's another colorless baby, which again, it doesn't matter. Like the typings of these baby Pokemon mean literally nothing. They have no weakness, no resistance, and they have no energy in their attack cost. But anyway, Squishy Healing, heal 50 damage from one of your benched Pokemon. This is a really interesting card. 50 damage is a lot, okay? Because Lily heals for 60. And yes, this does end your turn, but it's not a supporter card, meaning that theoretically speaking, we can heal for 50 with Azurill on the same turn that we just healed our stage 2 Pokemon for 60 with Lily, effectively healing for 110 damage in one turn. That is absolutely crazy with you. Now, you know, baby Pokemon in the meta right now are mostly strong leadoff options because they have free retreat, but that's the cool thing about Azurill. Even if we're not going to use it early in the game, we can just retreat out, right? So it's a very consistent leadoff option. And I think that the strategies with Azurill is going to be with some of those big stage 2 Pokemon that don't have great pace, and they aren't like super explosive, but they're really strong in the late game. You could pair this with something like a Venusaur, or you could pair this with something like, somebody mentioned like an Infernape EX, because they both have free retreat, and I find that to be very, very interesting. So we can attack with Infernape, right? Take a hit, and then on next turn, retreat out for free, and we're discarding all of our energies, but that's okay. Infernape goes to 0 energies. We retreat into Azurill, we heal it for 50, in the same turn, maybe we play a Lily, heal even 110 damage from Infernape, while also attaching an energy that turn. Azurill gets KO'd subsequently that turn after. Totally fine. We then go back into Infernape and attach that second energy, and now we're attacking effectively turn after turn, or turn every other turn for 140 damage, but we're healing a lot in the in-between turns. So there's a lot of really interesting combos with Azurill, and I think that this card is actually one of the more interesting things that I've ever seen in Pokemon Pocket. Again, I don't know if it's going to be meta. It's a really strong effect, but I think this Pokemon will see play in very specific scenarios. but maybe it's broken. Somebody will figure out a really, really strong way to be playing Azurill. I think it's a strong card, but it's not going to be like a universally used card because it's not really going to be that useful other than really specific combos and in specific strategies. But anyway, the baby Pokemon that are coming out in the set are just crazy. These are not the baby Pokemon I expected we would get. 10 damage and sleep and then 50 healing. These are crazy cards. Baby Pokemon. By the way, when Mega Pokemon come out, we need to really evaluate Azurill, right? Because let's just say you're playing a Mega Pokemon when they release, like in B1 or whatever they come out, and you're playing like a stage 2 Mega Pokemon. Imagine being able to play like a 200 plus HP Pokemon, attach a giant cape to it, heal it with Lily, and also heal it with Azurill on your off turns. Like the potential here with Mega Pokemon is kind of crazy. Because Mega Pokemon, you know, you lose the game when Mega Pokemon get KO'd, Azurill really actually fits quite well with them anyway, so we'll have to wait and see, but Azurill is a really, really interesting card. There's a lot of ideas that I would like to try with Azurill, but we'll really just have to wait and see. Really, really cool, really, really funny card. Yeah, I don't even know what else to think. Okay. We have a new Zangoose. Zangoose is pretty fun. 80 HP, so not a lot, but it does have counterattack, which is basically Rough Skin, if you guys remember Druddigon from back in the day. So less HP, it's colorless, 50 damage for 2 colorless, but if it gets attacked while it's in the active spot, you deal 20 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. A pretty significant card. I'm getting, you could play this with like the Eldegoss that like we talked about that retreats to the bench. We could Rocky Helmet Zangoose and your opponent takes 40 damage when they attack you. That's all pretty relevant stuff here. I don't know, like Druddigon doesn't see any play because it doesn't really make any sense, but theoretically speaking, this would be a better version of Druddigon, but it's along the lines of Druddigon and like Pyukumuku, and now we have Zangoose, right? So they're very similar, sort of like, you know, they deal damage when they get attacked type cards. They're interesting. I think that the Poliwrath also does kind of the same thing. But anyway, now let's get on to the new trainer cards. And this is really where everything is sort of going to come together in this video because the new trainer cards in Secluded Springs are absolutely insane. So we get 2 new tool cards. The first one here is Inflatable Boat. The retreat cost of the water Pokemon this card is attached to is 1 less. So this is kind of like a version of like Air Balloon in the official card game. So reducing the retreat cost on a tool card is relevant. So this is basically like a permanent X speed for water type Pokemon. Now, off the top of my head, I cannot think of any meta relevant water Pokemon with 1 energy in their retreat cost other than something like a Greninja. There might be other things off the top of my head, but I can't really remember. But this is actually a really interesting card. I don't know, again, off the top of my head, which decks are going to use this, but I do find that to be pretty interesting. Definitely a really strong tool card for the decks and the Pokemon that can use it. So we'll have to really just kind of wait and see if something really pops up that makes a lot of sense to be played with Inflatable Boat. But here it is. It's the first tool card that has retreat cost reduction, which, you know, is probably something that, you know, Pokemon Pocket is you know, like the developers are definitely planning something. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but there you go. Inflatable Boat. If there's anything you guys can think of to pair with Inflatable Boat, comment down below. But a very interesting card nonetheless. The next tool card is a doozy, guys. Memory Light, okay? The Pokemon this card is attached to can use any attack from its previous evolutions. You still need the necessary energy to use each attack. So what this means is that effectively, you know, whatever Pokemon you're using, if it evolved from a previous Pokemon, that Pokemon can use the attack of that previous evolution. There's not a lot of scenarios that Memory Light would make that much sense in, right off the top of my head. However, there's one, and we talked about it earlier in this video, guys. It is Phanpy. It is Phanpy. So Phanpy Donphan. Donphan has 160 HP. It's a stage 1 Pokemon, but now Donphan can use Flail. It can use Phanpy's attack if we have the Memory Crystal or Pendant, whatever the tool card is called, Memory Light. It can use this attack. So Flail here, again, does the amount of damage equal to the amount of damage that's on the Pokemon using this attack. So if Donphan with 160 HP with Cape, I think it goes to 180, it can take an attack for almost anything in the entire game and then deal the exact same amount of damage back for only 1 fighting energy. This is a very, very big deal, guys. This is going to directly buff Donphan pretty drastically. I said with Giant Cape, but we need the tool card attached anyway, so no Giant Cape. 160 is the amount there, but very interesting. We did also have this sort of new Donphan, which you technically could play with Memory Light. It has 120 and it takes 20 less damage from attacks, so theoretically speaking, You could play the single prize Donphan. The I guess, Phanpy attack is worse, right? But you could play just a single prize archetype version of Donphan. Going to be a really, really strong counterplay to Oricorio. However, one thing to keep in mind is that if Donphan EX is using Memory Light to copy Phanpy's attack, it still will not damage Oricorio because it's the Pokemon using that attack is technically Donphan EX, right? So it will not go through Oricorio, but we do have this Donphan, which would easily go through Oricorio, right? Which is definitely very, very interesting. There you go, guys. Memory Light. There's probably some other scenarios I'm trying to think, Sylveon could use Find a Friend, like somebody was commenting earlier. There's definitely going to be some other scenarios where this Memory Light card is relevant, but I don't know off the top of my head. Really, the Phanpy obviously is like the #1 example, but there might be some really interesting interactions with this card in the future. I don't remember all of the attacks from previous evolutions in this game because there was really no reason to up until now, but we'll have to dig through the archives and try to figure out something and try to cook something up with Memory Light. But Donphan is definitely very interesting to me, so we'll try to make that work. Should be a direct buff to Donphan, which I think is pretty cool and a really cool way to do that. Honestly, not something I really expected, but shout out to Memory Light. Now let's take a look here. There's no item cards, only 2 tool cards, but we do get 3 new supporter cards. One of them we've seen before, but the other 2 are very, very, very interesting. Let's take a look at Whitney. Okay, so Whitney here, heal 60 damage from one of your Miltank, and it recovers from being asleep, and paralyzed and confused, but not poisoned and burned. So that's an important note to remember there. But yeah, this is basically Lily healing for 60 damage from your Miltank. So again, if we go up to Miltank here, Miltank 110 HP, that goes to 130, right? With Giant Cape, and it's basically going to allow Miltank to stay alive in the active spot for a lot longer. So this is a very kind of similar combo inclusion here because it's all colorless. It's very similar to like Silvally. It's very splashable. It's only a 4-card combo to play 2 Miltank and 2 Whitney into your deck. But it's a really interesting sort of like universal sort of ramp archetype. It's going to be really strong to counter Oricorio, and it's going to be a really interesting little toolkit that we're able to pair with a ton of other strategies and a ton of other cards in the game. So many possibilities here. The combination of Whitney and Miltank is really, really strong, and I'm actually really excited about it. I thought that Miltank was a decent card, but once I saw Whitney, I realized that now it's actually pretty legit. And there's a lot of times where Miltank will be in the active spot attacking for 2, 3, maybe 4 turns in a row and effectively taking a lot of KOs. One thing to keep in mind is that it's only 1 energy. So if Miltank can deal a lot of damage and stay in the active spot for a long time, the Pokemon on our bench have a bunch of extra turns to kind of just get set up and built up because we're not attaching any extra energies to Miltank, and it's going to survive for a very long time. I'm really curious to see which combinations we can pair off with Miltank and Whitney. Very, very crazy, guys. Very, very cool. And again, it reminds me a little bit of like Silvally and Gladion, but now we have Whitney and Miltank. It's colorless, it's splashable, it's a bit different, but very strong nonetheless, and I'm actually really, really excited for that combo. Maybe it won't be good at all, but I think that's definitely really cool. And now we're going to end this video on something that I was not expecting to talk about. By the way, the crown rare here in the set is Mantyke, and the immersive art here is Suicune EX. This card is absolutely beautiful. There's a bunch of rainbow rares here, a bunch of new shiny Pokemon for Garchomp EX, Clodsire EX, Mew EX, and Infernape EX, which is certainly very, very cool. But the last card we're going to talk about today, and this is going to tie back into that control archetype. This is what I was talking about earlier with those Psychic-type Pokemon like Galarian Cursola, like Misdreavus and Mismagius. This is the new Psychic-type control package. Let's take a look at Morty. Morty, a new supporter card. For each of your Psychic Pokemon in play, look at that many cards from the top of your opponent's deck and put them back in any order. You read that correctly, guys. Theoretically speaking, we're able to look at the top 3 or top 4 cards of our opponent's deck and put them back however we want to, effectively making sure that our opponent doesn't draw into anything that they need to. Misdreavus allows us to look at our opponent's hand. Galarian Cursola forces our opponent to KO a Pokemon that might KO them back. All the while, we're slowing them down with Morty. We're looking at their hand with Misdreavus. We're playing red card. We're playing Mars. Control is a real archetype now in Pokemon Pocket. Is it going to be super viable? I don't know. We'll have to test it out. But certainly Morty seems like a very, very strong card now. Luckily, there are ways to shuffle your deck. You can play a Pokeball to shuffle your deck. There's other various ways to shuffle your deck, to be fair. Up like a Pokemon Communications, like an Iono. Like there's a lot of things that can do that. So there's ways to get around Morty. But the ability to play really interesting, sort of a really interesting control strategy with all of these Psychic type Pokemon, I think is going to be really, really cool. You know, we could also just play Morty in Sylveon Espeon and just sort of be a really annoying, you know, Sylveon Espeon deck. It actually kind of buffs Sylveon Espeon to some degree, which is crazy. They oftentimes do play like 1 or 2, you know, disruption cards. So now maybe we just play Morty and we can slow our opponent down even more. I'm really, really afraid of the prospect that Morty brings. One thing that's coming to my head immediately is like Giratina EX and Galarian Cursola. And just sort of being really annoying, but then really like able to sweep our opponent with Giratina. We'll have to wait and see. But anyway, guys, that's Morty. And that's Secluded Springs, guys. I think this set is very influential. Of course, we have all of the legendary beasts. Jumpluff is interesting. Poliwrath is kind of interesting, but there's so much other stuff in here. The new BB Pokemon are crazy. Morty's crazy. Miltank Whitney's crazy. Memory Light to Donphan is crazy. So much really, really cool stuff has come out in Secluded Springs. I am really excited, and I think that the metagame is going to shake up dramatically. We're going to cover it all here in the upcoming weeks, guys. This was a 35-minute video. It is 3:15 in the morning. I got to wrap this up. I got to edit this and get this uploaded for you guys. Stay tuned. We have a bunch of videos coming here on the channel for the upcoming days and the upcoming weeks. You're not going to want to miss it. This is, in my mind, this channel here is the #1 place to go for informative, you know, competitive Pokemon Pocket content. So we're going to try to deliver that to you guys in the upcoming days. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you guys later. And yeah. Peace out, guys.